Welcome to the Wilson Center Middle East program Art in MENA series, where we discuss the ways that people use art, film, and literature as a form of civic engagement and even protest in the Middle East region. I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Mandana Zandian as part of the conversation, an Iranian poet, literary critic, and social activist who's now based in California. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So please just start by sharing a little bit more about yourself and your work today.
Sure. So my writing career has gone over two stages, I can say. My first interest came when I was a teenager, and I started writing poems to express myself only for myself, I can say. Meaning that I didn't even share my writings with my friends. I thought like words were my best friends back then. They are still. As a matter of fact, for many years, we are lovers more than even friends. I have the most intimate relationship with words. And I think words and I made this world of our own, in which I always feel very safe and understood. So in the beginning, it started like that. And then it took me a few years until I realized that literature has this ability, has this strong capability to transform the very personal and private experiences of the writer into a public empathy. And that I realized by reading a lot, not from my writings. I would read lots of novels and poems, and I could relate to them. And I thought, what if some people could relate to what I write and have the same feeling when I read something? Then I started to share my writings with my friends and then got more public. That's how it started. And then also I would include writing book reviews in that stage of my career. I know book reviews normally are considered as a sort of academic way of writing because they have rules and styles that are defined in details. But for me, I only write about books that I really love, I really enjoy, I learn a lot from, and I can relate a lot to. So for me, writing about books is also sort of expressing myself. I want to share that with people. I want to invite people to read that certain book and probably have the same experience I had. So these two I put in one stage of my writing career. Plus, probably I can say, I always felt, maybe I'm wrong, but I always felt there is this, I can say, misrepresentation of Iranian people, especially in the West, that I was not okay with. It was like the portrait was mainly old, angry men who were chanting death to this and that all the time, and women were almost invisible, as if we were voiceless or we were all the same, which is not true at all. Women, especially younger generations, they have voices, they're different, they have different point of views. So that was another reason that I really like to write about in my poetry, in the books that I introduce, to share that with the world also. So that was one thing I have been doing for more than 2 decades by now. And then after I immigrated to the US about 20 years ago, I noticed that there are so much in our social history, especially for the 4 decades after Islamic Revolution in Iran, that I don't even know. Like, they were never taught to us by the regime. And even if they talked about that, they were so either distorted or completely opposite of what they were. And then I started the second part of my career, I can say, which is researching and interviewing, like yourself, with people who have been working on those fields. And they were first generation of immigrants. Many scholars immigrated after revolution, like maybe 20 years before me. And they are here now. They're outside of the geography of Iran. So I started having conversation with them and document their point of views as another narrative about what we have been missing all these years.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think you really covered a couple of critical points that have come up in a lot of my conversations. And the first one is how a lot of times art really begins as the relationship between the artist and the art themselves, and how powerful their practice is just to them as a person. And then from there, deciding to share it is really kind of a moment of growth, if you will, and sharing their work as a way to connect with other people and see if they're able to interact with the art in the same way, or even different ways, but in very personal ways. And so it sounds like you had a similar experience. And then with that, being able to start a conversation about really important topics that maybe are normally left out of society, or just whether it's intentional or not, and using art or literature and poetry as kind of the beginning of a conversation. So thank you again for sharing that with us. And you had mentioned that kind of the second part of your work is on research and learning more about Iranian history and culture. And so I'd love to know how, being part of the Iranian diaspora, how you're still able to work with people on the ground in Iran and still research and spread your work there while you're still located in the US.
Yes. Thanks to technology, nowadays the communication is much easier. Although, like while we are speaking right now, because of the movement that is going on in Iran, the internet has been disconnected almost very widely in Iran. So it's very difficult nowadays. But in general, over the years that I have been here, I have been in touch with Iranian people inside the country, different generations, all the time. When I need a source, when I need a book or newspaper or magazine that is published in Iran, I always had the ability to find it through friends and like scan it, send it to me. So that was never a problem until now, at least. And I think as a writer in diaspora, I always felt there are voices that I can echo for people who cannot really write about them. There are thoughts that people cannot really discuss it in Iran, or at least discuss it very clearly in Iran, because their life would be in danger. That's how bad it is. So I always consider myself as their voice also. So saying that, in a country like mine, when there is this oppressive regime, you will be defined as an activist, as you said, social activist, before you even consider yourself so. Like in my case, I was writing, of course, like poetry or prose, or doing these interviews that I told you, as a writer. And obviously, whatever is going on around you in society has a reflection in your writings, right? Because we just don't write in our room. It's really like a reflection of what is going on. So then there is this point that you realize whatever you are talking about is in complete contrary with the regime. Then you say, oh, I actually am an activist. It's not like you decide to be, it's just you want, like in my situation in Iran, because the Islamic Republic strongest problem is women. Like they're very much against anything about women. Like my body is their problem, my hair is this problem, even my voice. Women cannot sing in public in Iran. So even if I want to write a love poem, which is the most intimate subject I can choose, the most private thing I can write about, that is also in contrary with the system. So there is no way you want to be present, you want to have a public life, you want to write and be published, and then you are not an activist. Still, I never write in any resume that I am an activist, but I know that just doing this makes you an activist, because there's no other way. So when I am here now, then I feel it even more, because now I feel I even am not just an activist, a writer, I am responsible for people who cannot do what I can do freely. Like I go to demonstration nowadays that this movement, women rights freedom, is going on in Iran. So I go to demonstrations here in the US because I want to show the world, I want to draw attention to what is going on in Iran. So that's, I think, the role I am very much committed to as a writer in diaspora.
I think that's so important that you have such an awareness for how you represent your country, both to the Western audiences, but also then in reflection back to Iran itself, and how you are, in a sense, kind of communicating and spreading awareness and the stories on behalf of women and other people in Iran who might not have the same freedom or flexibility to do that. So you had just touched on this a little bit in your previous answer, but again, getting to the demonstrations that are taking place in Iran now. So we've seen people from across the country sustaining demonstrations for over 7 weeks now in response to the death of Mahsa Amini. So again, just looking at your reaction and your response as part of the Iranian diaspora, you had mentioned that you've been to several demonstrations in the US now. So can you just speak to a little bit of what you're seeing and how it's affecting you and your work?
Yes. Yeah, as you said, this demonstration has been going on for close to 2 months now. And it started with Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old girl from Kurdish region of Iran. She was not even an activist. She just came with her brother to capital, to Tehran, to visit Tehran. And she was arrested by police. They call in, the regime calls them morality police, which I don't find anything moral in them. I call them misogyny police, because their job actually is to stop women in particular and ask them to cover their hair, to cover their body, to cover their voice. So this is the very definition of misogyny to me anyway. So she was arrested by them, and she was beaten up, and after a few days, she died in their custody. Then Iranian women came to the streets to protest, especially young Iranian women. And it was just so, like, they improvised this. They started fire in the street, and they started to take off their headscarves, burn those in fire, and dance around the fire, chanting "Woman, Life, Freedom," which is the name of the movement and also the motto of the movement. So looking at that, I always question myself, what kind of person or system could be against these 3 words? Woman, life, freedom. They are beautiful, they are polite, they are full of life. There's nothing offending in those 3 words, right? They are not even dead to someone. So it started like that, and then you can imagine, only and only if you are against women and you want to control women's body, especially, the other 2 parts, life and freedom, also include in that part the woman in the beginning. So then you can be against them, and they are arresting them, they're killing them. 300 people have been killed for this, and thousands of people have been arrested. 40 kids, like, because high school people joined them. And right now, the movement is at the point that it's much more past these woman, life, freedom only for women's willings, desires, or demands. It's now, they understand that it's completely in the contrary with the regime. So they want the entire system to change. Now it is at that point. So it pretty much reminds me of, especially in the first few days, reminded me of that girl in the blue bra in Tahrir Square in 2011 in Egypt. That after that event happened and the soldiers dragged the lady, and it happened that her long dress fell off and her body and her blue bra was exposed. People started to question everything morally, culturally, politically. And I think this is exactly where art and literature, especially protest art and literature, come in. To me, literature helps me to ask I don't want to say the right question because I don't really believe in right and wrong, but the more precise question. That is the point, that you don't think about any party, political party, you don't think about ideology, you just have question about everything that then by nature is political to you. But yet your question is not really a political question. Now it's really about these three words, which to me really covers everything, if you can cover these three beautiful words. And during this time, I have been writing poems or proses about that. I had interviews in Persian radio stations that are. And because for a while I had a radio program about contemporary poetry, so I had this opportunity also to record poems by other poets that are protest poems, and just try to spread them around, just to both like help other people to know what is going on, and also, as I said, maybe help the questions to be more precise, because I think everything starts from the right question.
Yes, that's a really interesting point, that when you it can be almost overwhelming to see the scale of demonstration, especially over now 2 months, and to question, what does it mean? What is next? How does it affect the regime? But as you'd mentioned, when you just break it down and look at the three words and say, how does this affect individual people in the country? What do these three words represent to the women on the streets? Then you can really start to break down the importance and just like the personal story and the personal relationship that people have with the street and with the demonstrations, and that is really what is bringing people out. As you said, at the end of the day, it's about women, life, freedom. And so I really want to get to the point of poetry and literature, as you'd mentioned. But before I ask about that, the many observers, you had mentioned this, are noting that the protests are really led by women, and it's young women. And so I want to know, do you think that this suggests any changes that have taken place in Iran more broadly, that so many young women were willing and ready to take to the streets? Or was it just, this horrific event that really sparked it in these women?
That's a great question. I can answer in two parts to your question. First part, this young generation that are like my son's age, even younger, these generation have been connected to the world, I think, from the time they were infants and could hold a smartphone in their hands. So there is no way that an oppressive regime can have its ideology as the only truth in the world for them, because they know much more than that. They know the world and they want their rights. They want their personal rights. They know that they should have, like anyone else anywhere in the world, they should have choices, free choices. They have natural rights and they are aware of that. So there is no way the regime can oppress them. My generation was a bit more towards like between the past generation and this generation. So still there were people that are not that much aware, but this generation are impossible. What they want, they will gain. I'm almost certain of that. But about how women are leading this movement, young, because they're mostly young women, young girls, even like teenagers. Um, I think there is this amazing book by Professor Farzaneh Milani called Words Not Swords. This book was written many, many years ago, decades ago, before all this happened. And in that book, she is saying that women in Iran and in Middle East and North Africa, in the area, have been leading any movement that is for modernizing the country. And women writers were always at the forefront of those movements, and not in a political way, in a way that she describes as, for example, if I ask my husband or my son to participate in the work that we are doing at home, and I make them realize that we three of us have the same rights, that be outside, work outside, do whatever we want to do, and then have the same responsibilities that take care of our home. This will be transferred to the society. And women have been doing it. And women writers have been actually echoing that in their novels, in their poems. There are so many novels, like Persian novels, that, of course, they are not like political statements, but the way that the story is going on, when you read it, you see this picture has been portrayed. That's how powerful women are in home or at work or whatever they do in the society. And Dr. Milani believes that this is the beginning. She actually sort of predicted that. She said, women will be the leaders of the freedom movement in Iran. And now we are seeing it because this young generation, they are, most of them, maximum, they're like 20 years old. So this generation have been raised by those women, have been reading those women's books, texts. So this is how literature can help. I think about Mahsa Amini or the girl in blue bra that we were talking about. In both cases, as you very precisely and rightfully mentioned, there is this point that you ask yourself, what if the next person is me? Because it's completely possible. And this is the place that literature comes in. Literature tries to help you that, yes, this is completely possible. And that is the empathy that creates that unity, like not just inside the country, also in diaspora, there have been big demonstrations that they were coordinated by people. Like on October 1st, in more than 150 cities all over the world, at the same time, there was demonstrations. In Toronto, Canada, 50,000 people went out. Here in LA, 20,000 people went out. And we all just shouted, woman, woman, life, freedom. So this is how, to me, words matter. And words can really make a difference in our world.
And also the importance of literature that will be written now to document it for future generations. I mean, she has been able to document these social changes that are taking place in Iran. And I'm sure now she is not surprised that it is women who are leading, because she has been able to observe and document these very important changes that a lot of people ignore, and a lot of people don't. I mean, as you had mentioned at the start of our interview, a lot of people in the West, and even most likely people in the regime in Iran, just don't understand their people, and they don't understand the way that society is changing. And so as you've been mentioning, you know, the importance of literature in communicating these transformations is very, very important. So can you speak, you'd mentioned a few of the works, but can you just speak a little bit about the history of literature as part of protest in Iran and kind of what you've learned through your research?
Yes, like especially poetry, literature in general, especially poetry in Iran has a very, very long history. And because we had this national language, Persian language has been speaking in Iran for more than 1,000 years. So we are able to read texts from 1,000 years ago, which is great. So when I was preparing these protest poems to recite and like put online, like I started from 11th century by woman. Like there is this lady that is in her poetry protesting, and like roughly I can say she's saying that you cannot, is of course like metaphoric. She said, you cannot chain someone who her hair is like a chain, as you like can imagine. You cannot chain someone, her hair are like chain a woman whose hair is like a chain in a room, and you cannot make me do what you want. So it started back then, and then it came and came. And actually, women, I think, because at least for the past 43 years of this Islamic regime, but also before that in history, women have been experiencing the most strong oppression most of the times. So they felt it much more. They wanted to object to it much more. And because right now we are talking about a society that in Iran, more than 60% of university graduates are women. Like we have more women novelists than men, or more women poets than men. So, like there is no way you can oppress them. There is no way you can tell them you are second level citizen, because then they will ask why. I am more educated than men. I can write better. I can express myself better. I can do anything that they can do. So they are demanding equality. In Iran, for many years, the social space has been divided into two, like for men, for women. Like even in university, in cafeteria, women sit in one place and men sit in one place. So this movement, one of the beautiful things that they are doing, they are uniting those spaces. They mainly want to, I can say, they want to segregate a desegregated social space. And they started doing that. Like girls just went to the cafeteria and they sat together. And of course, the government didn't let them, attack them. And then they all went to the campus of the university and sat on the street together and had their lunch. So these are very beautiful, non-violent social behaviors. And they just talk because I think they know, like I believe at least, that words are so strong, because no dictator can kill them. You cannot kill my imagination. You can kill me, but my words will remain. So they know that. And I think this is why literature has been very important over the years in Iran, because we have been facing dictatorships several times. It's not the very first time. So then literature became a non-violent way of protesting. And although so many writers were killed also during the history, but their words, I can still recite their words, and they are still empowering, powerful and empowering.
And it builds on the work across generations. So you in this moment are able to look back at previous generations of writers and learn from their work and be inspired by their work. And I know that future generations will do the same for you. And so the what happens on the streets and the people that are killed will always remember their legacy. But in the same vein, the words will always be there for people to read and for people to be inspired by. I mean, you'd mentioning looking back at 11th century text is really incredible. And there are not a lot of other ways of demonstrating that have so much of a lasting power that art and literature do. So just to round out the conversation, are you seeing any poetry or other forms of art that are coming out of the protests today in Iran?
Yes, there are a lot. As a matter of fact, I think when a movement gets to the point that many protest art or literature comes out of the body of it, that is a sign that nothing can beat them. They will be victorious because the regime has one voice, right? They have one ideology, one voice, and they believe in one truth. That's it, period. But literature and art never are like that. They have many voices, they have different point of views, and then they can stand against this one voice that also has been heard forever because they have been repeating themselves all the time, and people are not even paying attention to it because they heard it enough. But then the new voices and different voices, they come, and I think they can completely beat that, and in a very non-violent way, I mean, and win this fight. I'm very positive. That doesn't mean that I mean like, okay, next week we are the victorious one, but I think in a very big picture, this cannot continue because people are demanding the very basic rights that is accepted all around the world. And now the world is one. We can have it. We want to have it, and we will have it.
Thank you so much for your time. We will continue to watch the developments in the ground and also the amazing work that is coming out of not only the men and women in Iran, but also part of the diaspora, like the very important work that you are doing. So thank you again for sharing this with us, and our strong condolences are with you and the Iranian men and women who are demonstrating.
Thank you so much for helping to voice out people in Iran. It really means a lot to me and to everybody in Iran. I really appreciate it.